Out here in the Wild West, a man's past rides with him.
She wanted revenge. The cowboy offered forgiveness. They say revenge keeps you alive, but it don't. It just keeps your heart from beating right. She rode into my land with hate in her eyes and a bullet with my name on it. Said I ruined her life, and maybe she was right. But when she pulled that trigger, all I saw was someone just as broken as me. Out here in the West, pain travels faster than the wind and forgiveness is rarer than rain. So I didn't fight back. I offered her coffee and silence. Didn't know that moment would change both our lives. 'Cause sometimes, the hardest thing a man can do ain't draw his gun. It's lay it down. Before we begin, take a moment to comment the name of your city. Where are you watching from tonight? And when the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. At the end of the 19th century, the Dakota Plains stretched across the horizon like a wound that never fully closed. The wind swept through the sunburned grasslands, carrying the scent of dust, of saddle leather, and of old memories still stained with blood. The setting sun glowed like a streak of dying ember, revealing the silhouette of a lone woman riding across the vast open field. She wore a black cloak, her figure steady, though her eyes carried something sharp as a blade, and just as tired. This was Clara Monroe, 29 years old, a woman whose heart had been torn apart on the night her father fell to a brutal robbery. In that single, searing memory, one name had never faded: Jesse Callahan, the quiet cowboy once tied to the gang responsible for that tragedy. From that day on, Clara's life held only one path: find him and end everything. As the sun touched the edge of the horizon, she pulled her reins and stopped. Ahead of her, standing still in the fading orange light, was a man's figure, Jesse. His wide-brimmed hat shaded half his face, his coat coated with dust, his eyes deep and worn, like someone who had lived far too many lifetimes. Clara raised her gun. In that moment, even the wind seemed to stop. The birds quieted. Only her heartbeat remained hard, wild, suffocating under the weight of her anger. And Jesse, he didn't draw his gun. He didn't step back. He didn't beg. He simply looked at her steady, silent, with an expression so calm it was unsettling. Then he spoke, his voice roughened by sun and wind. "If you came for revenge, ma'am, make it quick. I've been waiting for peace, one way or another." The words made Clara freeze. Her hand trembled, because what she saw in front of her no longer looked like an enemy. He looked like a man who had already been punished enough by life itself. Jesse didn't shield himself, didn't blink. He just stood there ready to receive the bullet she had carried in her heart for years. Clara bit her lip, all her fury gathering on the finger resting against the trigger. And then bang! The gunshot cracked through the dying light. The bullet veered off, kicking up dust from the dry ground. Clara collapsed into tears right in front of the man she believed she hated more than anyone alive. Jesse took a single, quiet step toward her. When he spoke again, his voice dropped low, soft enough that it sounded like he was speaking to the wind. "Revenge don't heal, Clara. Forgiveness does." And in that fragile moment, the Dakota Plains seemed to hold its breath, while Clara's heart began to crack open not from hatred, but from a truth she had never dared to face. Part 1. The Wound. The old funeral house stood tucked behind a narrow street in the town of Deadwind, where the wind always carried the smell of rotting wood and the weary creak of rusted hinges. Inside, a dim oil lamp cast its pale yellow glow across the worn walls, lighting the wooden table where a body lay beneath a white cloth. Clara stepped through the door, her boots still dusty from the road. Yet her footsteps trembled as if every step she took was falling into an endless, hollow pit. The funeral keeper bowed his head and gently handed her a familiar cowboy hat. The hat her father, Mr. Monroe, had never once removed, whether under burning sun or heavy snow. Clara clutched it to her chest. She didn't cry out loud. She wished she could. But this kind of pain didn't spill out as tears. It tightened around her chest, made her shoulders shake in small, helpless tremors. A younger version of herself appeared in the flicker of the oil lamp, the little girl who once sat behind her father on horseback, tiny hands gripping his belt, laughter lifting into the wind, now replaced only by darkness. Clara whispered, her voice barely more than breath, as if speaking to her own soul. "I'll find him. Father, I'll find Jesse Callahan, and I'll end all of this." A rough, gravelly sigh sounded behind her. Old Amos, the town's blacksmith, the man who had once shared warm conversations with her father, stood leaning against the doorframe. His face was carved by years of wind and work, and his eyes carried a sadness meant for someone standing too close to the edge. He spoke slowly, each word falling heavy, as though striking the heart itself. "Kid, if you chase revenge, you'll drink the same poison that killed him." Clara gripped the hat tighter. Her eyes were red, but her gaze sharpened like the edge of a blade. Nothing could pull her away from the path she had chosen. Not in that moment. But Amos's words slipped into her chest, quiet, steady, planting a single, fragile crack in a heart she thought had already turned to stone. And that crack would soon widen in ways she never expected. Part 2. The Tracker. The red dirt road of the West stretched before Clara like an old wound that never fully closed. The sky was sinking into dusk, and the blazing colors of sunset washed over the vast prairie, turning it into a sea of fire where even the wind carried the scorched taste of dying sunlight. Each step her horse took stirred up clouds of dust, swirling around her like red mist, wrapping the lone woman chasing the truth. Or perhaps chasing her own pain. Clara gripped the revolver in her right hand. Her fingers didn't tremble the way they had back at the funeral house, but they were cold, strangely cold, as if her heart had retreated deep inside her chest and locked itself away. Since sunrise, she had been following the tracks of the man she believed had destroyed her life, Jesse Callahan. The hoof prints pressed deep into the earth prints of a strong horse, ridden by a man carrying weight, whether it was exhaustion or the determination to flee. Clara didn't know which. She didn't allow herself to stop and think. Every forward step of her horse beat like a drum pushing her toward the truth. Her father could not rest without justice, even if that justice meant a bullet through Jesse's heart. The sky grew redder with every mile. In Dakota, sunsets didn't fade gently. They died brilliantly, bursting like the last ember before slipping into the dark. And in that burning light, Clara saw a figure on horseback far ahead. Steady posture, slow pace, not hurrying, not hiding. A long coat dusted with dirt, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. She knew. She didn't know how, but grief and hatred had sharpened her instincts into something feral. It was him, Jesse Callahan. The man Deadwind whispered about for years. The man she'd sworn for 3 years had pulled the trigger on her father. The man who now rode like a shadow carved from loneliness, not like a criminal on the run, but like a soul trapped inside the ruins of its own life. Clara didn't ride in close. She kept her distance far enough not to be seen, but close enough that she would never lose him. Her chest tightened. Her breath stumbled. Several times she wanted to spur her horse forward, end it all with a single shot, and let the dust take care of the rest. But every time the thought rose, her father's eyes appeared in her mind, gentle, yet firm, the same eyes that once told her, "Revenge never makes a person better, Clara." Then Amos's voice echoed inside her, "If you chase revenge, you'll drink the same poison he did." Clara tightened her grip on the gun, not to pull the trigger, but to steady the tremor rising from deep inside her ribs. She kept following Jesse's silhouette through low brush, across a dried creek bed cracked like broken pottery, where weeds grew in silver patches that shimmered under the bleeding sunset. And each time the wind shifted. The light caught his back just right, making him look like a statue carved from stone and fading fire. Clara let out a slow breath, heavy, conflicted. "Where are you going?" she whispered. Why head toward the hills? Why ride at sunset instead of running like a hunted man? There was no answer. Only the steady rhythm of Jesse's horse hooves. But the closer she followed, the clearer it became. He wasn't running. Not at all. A guilty man would flee toward the border, hide in the ravines, look over his shoulder every few minutes. Jesse did none of that. He rode straight toward the northern ridge, a place almost no one visited, except those who had loved ones buried there. Deadwind Ridge Cemetery. Clara realized it the moment the hill's silhouette sharpened against the dying light. A small cemetery scattered with old gravestones, some leaning, some nearly swallowed by the earth, a place colder than the wind, darker than dusk. And it was there at the edge of that lonely hill that Jesse pulled his reins and stopped. Clara froze. A gust of wind swept past, rustling her coat, sending a chill down her spine. So he wasn't running from his sins. He was riding toward a place meant only for those who carried a burden too heavy to speak aloud. Against the blood-red sky, his silhouette beside the graves looked almost unreal, like a lost soul searching for redemption. Clara's throat tightened. In that single moment, her hatred didn't vanish, but it trembled, wavered, as if shrinking before a truth far bigger than her wound. Jesse Callahan wasn't fleeing. He was returning to a cemetery. And that truth made Clara's heart beat in a way she didn't know it still could. Part 3. The Grave. Deadwind Ridge Cemetery rested on the slope of a barren hill, a place where the wind never stopped blowing and the dry grass rustled constantly as if whispering old, unfinished stories. The last trace of sunset had faded beyond the horizon, leaving behind a deep crimson glow that washed over the crooked gravestones, turning the hill into a land of memories and painful truths. Clara stood behind a low thicket, her hand still gripping the gun, but her heart stumbled when she saw Jesse dismount. He walked slowly between the leaning stones, each step heavy with the weight of years. There was no caution in his movements, no fear, nothing of a fugitive, only exhaustion, and a quiet sorrow deeper than anything Clara had ever seen in a man. Jesse knelt beside a grave. The gray stone was cracked, weathered, etched with a name Clara had memorized since that cursed night, Jonathan Monroe. Her father. Her heart dropped, not out of fear, not out of anger, but out of shock and something that cut deeper than the grief she had carried. Jesse lowered himself to both knees. He took a small bundle of wildflowers from his saddle, fragile blossoms gathered hastily from the roadside. He set them on the grave with a gentleness so soft it was as if he feared hurting the earth itself. The wind swept through his dusty hair, lifting the corner of his worn coat as he bowed his head. Clara had never imagined this. never pictured the man she hated kneeling at her father's grave, much less bringing flowers. Jesse placed his rough hand on the cold stone, and that hand trembled, not because of the wind, but because of the guilt that had followed him for years. His voice dropped low, hoarse, cracked by regret. He was a good man. Better than me. I tried to stop him, but I failed. The words cut through the cemetery's silence like a clean, sharp blade slicing straight through the hatred Clara had held for 3 long years. Everything she had believed, everything she had blamed him for, everything she had built her rage upon suddenly shuddered and collapsed. She stepped out from behind the brush, each footstep feeling like she was stomping on her own heart. Jesse turned. Their eyes met in the thin line between fading sunset and rising night. Clara wanted to scream, to demand answers, to unleash every shard of pain at the man kneeling before that grave. But when she raised her gun, the only thing she saw in his eyes was not defiance, not fear, but remorse, exhaustion. The look of a man weighted with a sin he could never wash clean, the truth. A truth she wasn't ready for. Her finger trembled, her heart twisted violently, then clink. The metallic sound rang out sharply across the dry ground. Clara had dropped her gun. The rage she thought was strong enough to kill him fractured into confusion, raw and overwhelming. She stared at Jesse, at the wildflowers on her father's grave, at the face of a man trembling not from fear, but from guilt. And for the first time since her father died, she no longer knew whom to hate. She no longer knew what to believe. She only knew one thing: the truth hurt more than any bullet ever could. Part 4. The Storm. Dakota rain didn't fall gently. It came down in heavy sheets, as if trying to wash the prairie clean of its red dust and old sorrows. The downpour hammered against the darkness, a steady roar echoing across the empty land. Clara pulled her cloak tight around her, hiding herself in the curtain of rain as she followed Jesse in silence. Cold water seeped into her hair, her clothes, her skin numbing her body, while her heart burned hot from what she had just witnessed at the cemetery. Jesse didn't know someone was trailing him. Or perhaps he knew, and simply no longer cared. He returned to his horse, shed an old wooden structure with cracked walls and a tin roof that rattled beneath the storm. A dim oil lamp glowed through a narrow gap, casting thin strips of light across the wet ground. Clara hid behind a tree, half soaked, eyes fixed on the man inside. Jesse hung his coat on a hook and stepped toward his black stallion. He rested his hand on its neck, stroking gently a soft, comforting gesture. The horse nudged its head into his chest and sighed, as if it too understood the weight he carried. No urgency, no fear, nothing like a man on the run. He took a cloth and wiped the mud from the horse's legs, checked its hooves, then murmured softly, "Easy. Boy, we're almost through another storm." Clara swallowed the rain along with the tight knot in her throat. She had always imagined Jesse as ruthless, cold, heartless. But the man sitting on the old wooden chair under the pale lamp, mending the torn hem of his coat with slow, careful stitches, he was not the monster she had pictured. Each stitch looked like it pulled at something inside him, as if he were mending his own chest rather than fabric. A gust of wind blew rain through the small window, and in that slanted beam of light, Clara saw it. A long scar running from his shoulder down his arm. A thick, ugly mark. The kind made by a bullet he had taken that night. A chill shot down Clara's spine. Not a brawl. Not an accident. A gunshot wound. The same wound her father had whispered about in his failing breath. One of them was hit bad. Clara stood frozen, her heart twisting violently inside her. If Jesse had been shot that night, if he had tried to stop the robbery, if he wasn't the one who pulled the trigger on her father, the thought hit her like a blow. Everything she believed was collapsing piece by piece like the old horse shed before a storm. Inside, Jesse paused. He set the needle and thread down, pressed a hand to his forehead, his back curving in exhaustion, the posture of a man too tired to keep fighting his own life. He stared into the darkness beyond the door, not knowing that in that same darkness, a pair of eyes were watching him. His voice rose, not loud, but clear, the voice of a man speaking to the night itself. Some sins can't be washed. He stopped, his breath heavy. Then he finished in a whisper, so soft even the rain almost swallowed it. But I keep trying anyway. The words struck Clara like a slow-turning blade, not painful, but devastatingly true. True enough to choke her, true enough to shake the foundation of her hatred. What kind of criminal stood alone in the rain and blamed himself like this? What kind of sinner laid flowers on a dead man's grave and whispered apologies to the wind? Clara gripped the tree trunk, rain mixing with her ragged breaths. For the first time in her life, she wasn't sure she wanted to kill him. She wasn't even sure she understood herself anymore. Because some men carry guilt without being evil, and some wounds hurt deeply, even when you don't yet know who caused them. The rain kept pouring, fierce and relentless. But inside Clara, another storm was rising. A storm far more violent than the one falling from the sky. Part 5. The Confrontation. The rain kept pounding on the old tin roof of the horse shed, a heavy and growling rhythm like the sky itself was angry. The dim oil lamp in the corner cast trembling patches of golden light across the walls, flickering like the fragile breath of fate itself. Clara stood at the doorway, her cloak soaked through, her hair dripping against her cheeks. She was no longer hiding in the shadows. The moment had come. Jesse sat with his back to her, still focused on mending his torn coat. He hadn't noticed her, but Clara's heart was beating wildly, and her fingers clenched the gun so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She stepped forward. The old wooden floor let out a faint creak. Jesse froze, but didn't turn around. "Who's there?" he asked softly, a steady, calm voice that made the air stand still. Clara took another step. The lamp's light fell across her face, a face shaped by wind and rain, eyes red from more than just the storm. She raised the gun. Her voice cracked through the room like a whip cutting the dark. "You took everything from me." Jesse turned slowly. And when the light revealed his face, Clara saw the exhaustion cut deep into every line, but not fear, not pleading. Only a quiet acceptance, the kind carried by a man who had stood at this edge far too many times in his own darkness. He looked at the gun, then into her hurt-filled eyes, and answered in a voice so gentle it tightened her chest. "Then take what's left." No tremor, no resistance, no attempt to escape. Just surrender. Clara felt her own hand start to shake. She no longer knew whether the water on her face was rain or tears. She had imagined this moment for years, the moment justice would be done, the moment she would give her father peace. But now, seeing him standing there, not stepping back, speaking with such raw honesty, something inside her split open, not hatred, but a storm of confusion tearing apart everything she'd believed. Why? She wanted to ask, but her throat locked tight. A violent flash tore the sky. Crack. Thunder exploded overhead and her control shattered with it. The gun slipped from her fingers and hit the ground with a sharp metallic ring that echoed through the shed. Clara collapsed after it, head bowed, shoulders shaking, her sobs breaking loose like a confession she could no longer hold back. She cried as if 3 years' worth of tears had finally forced their way out, crying for her father, crying for the pain, crying for the half-truth she had just touched, crying for herself because she no longer knew what was right or wrong. Jesse stood still for a long moment. He could have stepped away, could have defended himself, could have run. But he did none of those things. Instead, he drew a slow, deep breath and walked toward her, careful, gentle, as if afraid any sudden move might break her even more. He removed his leather coat, half soaked from the rain and from the repairs he had been working on. Without a word, he draped it over Clara's shoulders so softly it made her cry harder. The warmth of the coat didn't just chase away the cold, it tightened around her heart. Not because of love, but because of pain. A pain too deep for words. In the sound of rain and the dim sway of the oil lamp, two people who once stood at opposite ends of hatred were left with a single, naked truth. Neither of them truly wanted to pull the trigger. Part 6. The Truth. The rain finally stopped, leaving behind puddles on the ground that reflected the faint, pale moonlight. Jesse built a small fire beside the horse shed, and Clara sat a short distance away, far enough to keep a boundary, but close enough to hear every heavy breath he drew. The flames crackled softly, casting a reddish glow on their faces, revealing wounds no one could see but both of them felt. The night wind drifted through cold, though gentler than the storm. Clara pulled Jesse's coat tighter around her shoulders, not because of the chill, but because of a tremor inside her that hadn't quite settled. Jesse sat silently for a long time, his hands clasped together, eyes fixed on the ground as if he were trying to gather pieces of a memory he had buried too deep. Clara didn't speak. She could have screamed. She could have demanded answers. She could have blamed him. But not after what she had seen. Not now. At last. Jesse exhaled a long, heavy breath that carried the weight of the past. "You deserve to know the truth," he said, his voice gravelly, worn like stone scraped raw. Clara looked at him, waiting. Jesse lifted his head, letting the firelight reflect in his tired eyes. 3 years ago. I wasn't one of the men who shot your father. He paused, his hands tightening together. I tried to stop them. I swear to God I did. Clara drew in a sharp breath, her chest tightening painfully. Jesse continued, his voice low, unwavering. As if he had rehearsed these words alone in the dark for years, I got shot the moment I stepped between them. Bullet went straight through my shoulder. He brushed his fingers along the long scar on his arm, the same scar Clara had seen in the rain. I passed out before I could get back up. When I finally reached your father, he was already... He didn't finish. He didn't have to. The wind rustled through the grass, soft and mournful, as if trying to shield them from a truth too raw to face. Who killed him? Clara whispered, her voice barely riding the breeze. Jesse looked straight into her eyes. There was no defense in his gaze, no excuse, only the bare, brutal truth. He died by the hand of his own. One of them turned on the others for the gold. The ground seemed to tilt beneath Clara. The man she'd sworn to kill had been dead for years. And the man sitting before her, The man she had hunted across the plains had been the only one beside her father in his final moments. Jesse's voice cracked, his tone trembling for the first time. Clara saw him fragile. I buried Mr. Monroe myself. Clara felt something twist painfully inside her chest. Her vision blurred. He buried her father. He visited his grave. He brought wildflowers. He knelt in the dust and begged forgiveness. He lived 3 long years with a guilt no one had ever asked him about. And she, the woman who came to kill him, could only stare at the man she had mistaken. Clara covered her mouth, trying to swallow her sobs, but failing. Tears fell heavy, like stones dropping into still water. I spent all these years hating the wrong man. Her voice broke, shattered by the night. Jesse tilted his head, looking at her with eyes so sorrowful even the wind fell silent to listen. He spoke gently, soft as a confession. Hate still burns the right one, darling. Clara cried, not holding back, not hiding. Not for her father, nor for loss, nor for vengeance, but for the truth she had finally found after years of wandering in the dark. The fire kept burning, and in its reddish glow, 2 people who once stood on opposite sides of hatred now sat separated by nothing but a single breath. Part 7. The Stay. Dawn in Dakota rose softly like the first breath after a long, violent storm. The early light washed the prairie in a pale gold, warm yet uncertain, like a heart that has just shed a heavy weight but doesn't know what to do with the emptiness left behind. Clara packed her things. The old leather bag was strapped tight to her saddle, the reins gathered neatly in her hands. Her movements were firm, practiced, but her fingers trembled just enough to betray her. She didn't know whether she wanted to leave, or was trying to convince herself that she should. She didn't look toward the porch, but she knew he was there. Jesse leaned against a wooden post, broad shoulders catching the first soft light of morning. His face looked calmer than it had the night before, but his eyes were deep, restless, like a lake that never stopped rippling. Clara turned her back to him, tightening the strap on her pack, then placed her foot in the stirrup. Part of her wanted to run to escape this place, this man, the truth that had cracked her world open. But another part, a part she wasn't ready to name, held her still, rooted her to the ground like someone lost between 2 roads. Just as she prepared to ride away, his voice came slow, warm, carrying a fear. He tried, but failed, to hide. You can ride off angry, or stay and start again. Clara froze. The morning wind brushed her cloak, making it flutter like it was hesitating for her. She turned her head, and their eyes met somewhere between the last shade of night and the first light of day. Jesse didn't move closer. He didn't beg. He didn't cling to her with desperation. He simply stood there, his hands hanging loosely at his sides, rough, calloused hands shaped by years under sun and hardship. And Clara noticed. They were trembling, not from cold, not from fear of being shot, but from the fear of losing someone else. She stared at those hands for a long time. The cracks in his skin told stories of mistakes, of getting back up, of guilt carried through long, sleepless nights. They weren't the hands of a cruel man. They were the hands of someone who had tried to live right, but was dragged into darkness anyway. Clara sat still on her horse, her heart pounding hard enough to break free. Every pain, every bit of hatred, every shred of confusion, all of it tightened around one question. If she left now, what exactly was she leaving behind? A man who deserved punishment, or a man who had spent years trying to be good while carrying a shadow no one else would bear? The sunlight hit her eyes, making them shimmer as if they were about to break. Then slowly she lowered her hand. Her small hand reached toward his. Jesse flinched, but he didn't pull away. He simply stood there, letting his rough, trembling hand rest in hers, a silent confession that he didn't want her to go. Clara didn't say a word. She didn't need to, because the moment their hands held each other in the morning light, everything was already spoken. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a promise. But it was a beginning. Small, fragile, trembling, two wounded souls finding one another in the ruins of their pain. And sometimes, that is enough to start again. Part 8. The Rebuilding. The days that followed passed slowly, as if time itself on the Dakota plains wanted to give them room to breathe, to heal, to start again from the smallest things. In the mornings, sunlight spilled across the fields, casting a soft gold over the old wooden ranch. Clara began waking earlier than before, sometimes even earlier than Jesse. She brewed coffee in the small kitchen, and the warm aroma drifted through the house like it was gently waking up every corner still heavy with sleep. Jesse would walk in, hair slightly messy, eyes still carrying the tired weight of a man who had lived too long with guilt. But he always came close, gave a slight nod, and said, "Morning, Clara." At first, his voice was stiff, each word sounding like it had to push through a door that had been locked for years. But day by day, the morning greeting softened, warmed as if he was slowly relearning the softness life had stolen from him long ago. Clara didn't speak much, but she listened, she watched, and she began to see the walls inside him crumble quietly, slowly, like an old house warming under gentle sunlight. During the day, they rebuilt the broken fence. Jesse dug the post holes and set the stakes, while Clara lifted the wooden planks one by one. Sometimes their hands brushed a light, passing touch, soft as a breeze, yet strong enough to make Clara's heart skip. They cared for the horses together, while Jesse taught Clara how to stroke a horse's mane the right way, how to read the fear in one pair of eyes and exhaustion in another. Clara, without trying, taught Jesse how to smile again. Whenever she said something a little silly, a little clumsy, his eyes softened, and the corner of his mouth lifted with a smile so gentle it made her breath catch. The first time she saw that smile, she froze for a moment. A quiet smile, a slow one, not showy, just honest, so honest she had to look away because her heart softened too quickly. In the evenings, they sat on the porch watching the sun paint the hills in red and orange. Clara folded saddle blankets. Jesse checked the reins, each doing small tasks, yet somehow sharing a whole life. One afternoon, while Jesse was herding the horses toward the stable, a playful colt nudged Clara from behind. She yelped, stumbled, then burst into laughter, a bright, clean sound that rose into the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. Even the bird startled into flight. Embarrassed by her own laughter, Clara turned away, covering her mouth. But Jesse, standing a few steps away, had already been watching her. His eyes stopped, and then very softly he smiled. Not a forced smile, not a polite one, but a real smile, one he might have forgotten how to make. Clara saw it, and they stood there in silence, letting the peaceful moment sink into them like a warm breeze gathering the last days of winter. Later, when the fire crackled inside the old house. Jesse took out a dusty guitar from the corner. He sat down, plucked a few simple chords. The first notes were rough, but honest, like his voice when he spoke the truth. Clara sat nearby, hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea, listening without saying a word. The guitar echoed through the quiet space, touching the invisible walls they had built around themselves for years. Every note felt like an apology, a thank you, a sigh blending together into a sound that needed no translation. And when the night settled over the wooden roof, Clara understood something they were forgiving. Not just forgiving each other, but forgiving themselves. Forgiving the years lived in anger. Forgiving the mistakes that couldn't be undone. Forgiving the scars they thought would haunt them forever. And amidst that quiet evening, Jesse's guitar kept playing slow, warm, hopeful, like a whisper saying that sometimes healing doesn't begin with grand gestures, but with a smile and a song on a peaceful Dakota afternoon. Part 9. The Test. That afternoon, the Dakota sky turned a heavy gray, the kind that warned of a storm building behind the clouds. Clara was stacking hay bales. Jesse was checking the newly built fence. The world felt calm. So calm that Clara almost forgot the darkness still roaming outside their small sanctuary. Then horse hooves thundered across the plains. Fast. Chaotic. Clara snapped her head up. Jesse turned instantly, his eyes narrowing. 3 riders raced toward them, faces covered, guns at their sides. Clara felt her stomach drop. The old gang. The ones who had dragged Jesse's name through the mud for years. The ones responsible for her father's death. Jesse Warren, one of them, shouted, sneering. Heard you've been living real nice. Feels a bit unfair, don't it? Before Clara could react, Jesse grabbed her and pulled her behind him. A burning bottle came flying. Whoosh, boom. Flames burst across the stable, swallowing the dry wooden roof in seconds. Horses screamed in panic, kicking through the smoke. Clara gasped and tried to run toward them, but Jesse snatched the gun from the windowsill. His eyes changed. Gone was the morning's softness. Gone was the man who smiled quietly at her jokes. Only fire remained. Clara cried. But he raised the gun, both hands gripping tight, face hard as forged steel. He was about to shoot, about to end 4 years of injustice in blood. But Clara lunged forward and grabbed his wrist, jerking the gun downward. Her voice broke as she shouted, "Not like this." No more blood. Jesse froze. The fire's glow reflected in his eyes, casting 2 colors across his face: hatred and hope. Clara held his wrist firmly, her small hand gripping his with surprising strength. "They want to drag you back into the mud," she said, voice shaking but steady. "But you're not the man you were 3 years ago." Jesse's breath trembled. His shoulders slumped. His fingers loosened. The gun fell to the dirt with a heavy thud, a sound like the end of a long, cursed chapter. Before the gang understood what had happened, Jesse and Clara ran straight toward the burning stable. They fought the fire, pried open the stalls, and freed the terrified horses. Smoke stung their eyes. Heat seared their skin. But neither stopped. They saved. They chose to save. When the last flame finally died down, Clara collapsed to her knees, exhausted. Jesse immediately dropped beside her, an arm sliding around her shoulders. Smoke still hung in the air, but in the middle of the scorched earth and the sound of their ragged breaths, something had changed. Jesse pulled her into a tight embrace, not because of the burned stable, not because the crisis had passed, but because he had almost lost himself and she had stopped him. He lowered his head, his voice rough and slow, as if afraid the words might break something sacred. Guess we both found something worth protecting. Clara closed her eyes, letting his smoke-scented breath brush her hair. And she understood. It wasn't the horses. It wasn't the ranch. It wasn't pride. What they wanted to protect was each other. Part 10. The Peace. Late afternoons in Dakota had a beauty all their own, quiet, deep, and gentle enough to make even the most broken hearts want to linger a little longer. The sky glowed red like wine, its soft colors spilling across the wide prairie, turning the small porch of the ranch into the most peaceful place in the world. Clara and Jesse sat side by side on the old wooden steps, each holding a cup of warm coffee. Steam curled upward, blending with the evening breeze into thin trails of mist. There was no rain now, no fire, no gunshots. Only the wind through the grass and the faint clink of ceramic cups touching. Clara opened her worn leather notebook, the last thing she still had from her father. The page for today was blank, but her hands no longer trembled. She dipped her pen in ink and wrote slowly, steadily. As if each word was a breath finally released, I found the man I hated, and he gave me peace. When she finished the sentence, something inside her eased, like she had just given her father the ending he never had, not one of blood, but of forgiveness. She closed the notebook and smiled softly. Not a forced smile, not a broken one, but the smile of someone who had finally stepped out of the dark. Beside her, Jesse stared into the distance, his eyes no longer clouded with torment, no longer guarded, no longer bracing for pain, only quiet. The quiet of a man who had finally set down a burden he had carried for years. Clara noticed. She didn't speak right away. She simply watched him as the sunset painted his face in deep red, a face once shadowed by so much pain that even his eyes seemed trapped in darkness. But today, he was at peace, and that peace was real. She set her cup down and turned toward him. Jesse looked back, a faint smile touching the corner of his lips, a smile meant only for her. Clara reached out. Her fingers gently touched his, the same rough, calloused hands that had once trembled with fear of losing her, that had trembled with guilt, but now shook only from quiet emotion. She squeezed his hand softly, her voice warm and truthful enough to make even the evening wind pause. You gave me forgiveness before I asked. Jesse didn't look down at their joined hands. He looked at Clara straight, deep, sincere, with a tenderness that made her heart ache. He spoke quietly, each word carving itself into the moment. And you gave me love before I deserved it. No kiss was needed. No vows. No grand gesture. Only the breeze carrying their words across the prairie. Because sometimes, the greatest peace is simply sitting beside the one you care for under a wine-red sunset, knowing your heart has found its way home. The redemption. The last sunset of the day draped the Dakota plains in a deep crimson light stretching to the horizon. The evening wind drifted soft and warm, carrying the scent of dry grass, the echoes of the Old West, and stories that had yet to be finished. Clara and Jesse rode side by side away from the ranch, toward the fading glow behind the distant hills. Their shadows stretched long across the earth, rising and falling with each steady step of their horses. No promises spoken, no oaths declared, just a shared glance, a quiet breath, a perfect understanding. They had chosen the same road. The camera pulled back slowly, letting the sound of hooves blend with the wind. Somewhere in the distance, deep, gentle guitar chords played like the heartbeat of the Wild West itself. Not sad, not dramatic, just soft, healing music for two hearts that once bled and were now learning how to beat peacefully again. And then, as the last ray of sunset slid across their backs, the story spoke its truth. A love that doesn't save by miracle, but by kindness. A love that doesn't erase the past, but helps two people save themselves. Across the vast open plains, the final narration rose slow, heavy, timeless. Out here in the West, revenge turns to dust, but forgiveness builds a home. The evening wind carried those words far and wide, as if engraving them into every hill, every blade of grass, every lingering ember of dying sunlight. Two souls once lost, once broken, once swallowed by darkness, now rode side by side, toward the only place their hearts felt right, toward each other. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment. Tell us what forgiveness means to you. Don't forget to like, share, and rate this story from 0 to 10. Wild West US, where broken hearts find their way home.
He found peace, not by forgetting his past, but by forgiving